Tes Amud Beis, 9b, we're in the middle of the Mishnah. We left off yesterday at the first half of the Mishnah, which discussed some characters in history who were dealt measure for measure in the negative. We began with Shimshon, Samson, the mighty Samson, whose downfall was related to his eyes, in that he laid eyes on a Philistine woman, fell for her, and as a result, at the end, his demise, when they finally, when his wife, Delilah, who we'll learn about, finally coaxed him into telling the secret about his long hair and his not drinking wine, she cut his hair, and the Philistines captured him, and they, poked his eyes or blinded him. So he was struck by his eyes as a result of his misdeed related to his eyes. Then we had Avshalom, and about Avshalom, we said three things. All right? Yep, three things. Avshalom is King David's son, who towards the end of King David's life leads an almost successful rebellion against his father, trying to replace his father before his father's death, which would essentially pass on the kingship to Solomon, to Shlomo. So, and in the rebellion, he's quite successful in gaining support by deceiving many people. So the first of the three things we say about Avshalom is that he showed off with his hair. He showed off his good looks with his long locks of hair. And therefore he was, part of his demise as a result of his hair. His hair got caught in a tree as he's running in battle. And as he's hanging there, he was struck first by 10 arrows by some of King David's men, and then three sticks to the heart by Yoav, King David's primary general. And these three things, hair, 10 arrows, 3 rods to the heart, are all measure for measure. He showed off with his hair. He was caught in his hair. He engaged with 10 of his father's concubines, designated women for companionship, let's say. He cohabitated with them, 10 of them, and therefore 10 arrows. He stole the hearts, or he deceived 3 different groups. First of all, his father, he deceived his father. He deceived the court, Bezdin, and he deceived the Jewish people. And we explained a little bit last week. Rashi told us from the Gemara in Yerushalmi, which told us that Avshalom had a paper from his father because of an offer he wanted to bring, a paper from his father stating, please send, 2 men of my son's choosing shall go with him. And he showed it to 2 people, those 2 people came with him, and he showed it to another 2 people, and those people came with him, and he showed it to another 2 people, and they came with him, until eventually he had 200 people following him, and then a bunch of people followed him. So he deceived the hearts of the people, the Bezdin and his father, and therefore 3 hearts stolen, and therefore 3 stabs to the heart. So those are the negative historical events described in measure for measure in the negative. And now the Gemara is going to go, now the Mishnah is going to go to the positive. And we're hoping that today we'll find how in the positive, it's not just random events of negative and random events of positive, but rather these events of the negative are related to Sotah specifically. And that we kind of addressed a little bit yesterday, how Shimshon is with the hair, and the hair, Shimshon is with the eyes, even though he also has an issue with the hair, right? He has long hair and his hair is cut, but he's with the eyes, right? He sees something he doesn't want, which of course is related to Sotah, who sees and is looking out for a man that she's not supposed to want, which leads to step 2, Avshalom with the hair. A hair is a way of showing off and attracting attention. And then which leads to Avshalom engaging in actual intimacy with which he's not supposed to, his father's concubines, which then leads to deception of the heart, which we suggested maybe means not just that the relationship goes beyond physical into romantic and emotionally attached, which is sometimes more complex than just the physical relationship. So that's related to the Sotah, clearly. And we're hoping today to see how the positive people we're going to talk about in history, who were measure for measure, might counteract the negative behavior we just described from these other characters. So let's see. First, let's learn the Gemara, the Mishnah in its simple sense, just translating the words and understanding them, and then we'll see if we can come with something. I really just I have a little bit in my head. I don't have everything in mind, so I'm really going to work this out with you. So let's see what we get. So the line begins with the word shvatim, and then right in the middle, the word v'chein, and there's a small little, I don't know, my Gemara has a little hey there, like a little footnote with the letter hey, if that's in there. But it's just a line below the parentheses in the Mishnah. Well, there it says v'chein as well. You have it there?
Yeah.
V'chein as well. L'inyan ha'tova, the same idea holds true in the positive. The same idea of measure for measure. So where's the positive in measure for measure? So first event is Miriam. Miriam is, of course, Moshe's older sister. And she, himtina l'Moshe sha achas. She waited for her brother Moshe for an hour. For 1 month, for, I don't know if it means a literal hour or if it means like one period, small period of time. Shenemar, as the verse reads, I think it's pronounced it. Yeah. It's hard to see the vowels here. His sister stood or waited at a distance. So this is talking about when Pharaoh decrees that all Jewish firstborn should be thrown into the Nile, because his astronomers tell him that there's going to be born a male who's going to lead the Jews out of Egypt. And he therefore instructs that they all be thrown into the Nile. And Miriam, there's a lot of detail, but we'll stick to just the basic story. Maybe we'll unfold some of the detail when we discuss this afterwards. So the sister Miriam devises a plan that her younger brother who was born, who's eventually supposed to be thrown into the Nile, should be put into a basket with pitch, making it float, and put him into the Nile. So he's in the Nile, but he's not drowning in the Nile. He's floating on the Nile. And she watches from a distance till the point where Pharaoh's daughter, Batya, brings in Moses and raises him. Right? That's how Moshe is raised in the palace, and that's why he's not really part of slavery, and that's the whole story unfolds, where he eventually sees an Egyptian striking a Jew. He kills the Egyptian. He runs away. All that story. He runs away to Midian, gets married, and Hashem sends him back to free the Jewish people. So Miriam waited for her brother just for a little while there. She's watching them to make sure she's okay, right? And she actually like helped him because he wouldn't feed from any of the wet nurseries that Pharaoh offered. And Miriam went and advised to bring a Jewish midwife, and she brought her mother. So Yocheved ended up feeding his own son, all because Miriam waited there for a little while. So as a result, so measure for measure, she behaved positively by waiting for her younger brother for this short period of time while he's floating in the Nile. Lefichach, therefore, years later, Nisakvala Yisrael, all the Jewish people waited, Zayin Yomim B'Midbar, 7 days in the desert for her. Shenemar, as the verse reads, Va'am Loi Nasa, the people did not travel, Ate Asaf Miriam, until Miriam was brought back into the community. So this is a reference to, where am I? Here, right?
She was
right?
exiled from the camp.
That's right. That's right. So she had leprosy, the spiritual skin discoloration as a result of spiritual affliction, which is the result of actually lashon hara, right? For gossip, for speaking negatively about others, right? Because Miriam and Aaron talked about Moshe no less, about who Moshe married. All these things that connect as marriages. Well, let's see. So she talked about her brother, and therefore she was struck with this skin discoloration, the saras. And the law is that someone who has a saras is to be removed from the camp for 7 days. The person has to reside outside until the body is healed, and then they can come back in with the whole process of purification. So there's a traveling camp. So she's outside of the camp. When they're traveling, it's kind of hard to say where's a camp and what's not a camp, right? Because they're traveling. So the people waited there for 7 days until she went through the whole purification process. And then she came back to the camp, and then they kept on going. And this is all measure for measure. This is a reward for waiting for a little bit from Moshe. So as a result, the entirety of the Jewish people wait for her for 7 days because she waited it previously in her life. Measure for measure. Okay. Now, here's the interesting thing. We're not going chronological. We're going now back in history. Because this is Miriam with Moshe. And now we're going backward to Yosef. This is second historical characters, measure for measure. Namely, Yosef Zacha, Likvar Es Aviv. Yosef was the one who merited to bury his father Yaakov. And he did it with great fanfare. He was king, or second in command. Rashi refers to him just as king, but he was second in command. And he persuaded Parai to, we'll see in a second. Now, and there was no one greater who had a greater fanfare funeral than him, right? He gave his father a funeral with fanfare. So he, as second in command, also was buried with great fanfare. But we're to see soon, it wasn't just that it was with great fanfare, but actually Moshe Rabbeinu himself did it. So let's see, at least later when he was taken out of Egypt. Shneimar, the verse reads, Vayal Yosef likvaras aviv, vayal ima gam rechav gam parashim. When Yosef persuaded Parai to allow him to bury his father in Eretz Yisrael, in the cave, like the cave of Machpelah, where Yitzchak, where his grandfather Yitzchak is buried, and where Avram is buried, and Sarah is buried, right? So Parai agrees, and they travel with Yaakov's casket through Egypt all the way to the cave, and on the way there's all kinds of fanfare. People come and stop, and there's eulogies. The Pasuk describes quite the great fanfare. So he put on a great display of respect to his father in doing this. And as a result, and Milon Ugadol Yosef, who had a greater interment than Yosef himself, Shalonis Asikboy, of whom nobody else was involved in his burial, Ela Moshe himself. Moshe himself did it. Right? There's no greater honor than Moshe Rabbeinu himself, who no one obviously greater than Moshe Rabbeinu, and he himself is the one that handled the interment of Yosef. And the Eid Yisrael Gadol Menu, there's no one greater than Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Shneimar, as the verse reads, Vayikach Moshe atzmos Yosef imay. Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him from Mitzrayim, and he was involved with bringing him to be interred. And Milanu Gadol. Now, in turn, Moshe Rabbeinu himself was rewarded measure for measure, in that having taken on the responsibility of Yosef's interment, Milon Gadol Moshe, who had a greater interment than Moshe, where God himself buried Moshe Rabbeinu. Shneimar, as the verse reads, Vayikra Oisai Begai, and he was buried there at the pasuk identifies where he was buried. It's Moav Mulbeis Par V'lo Yadei Ishes Kurasa Yayim B'Zeret. And Lo Al Moshe Bavad. So Hashem himself was buried Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the reward, measure for measure, for having involved himself with the burial of Yosef, who in turn was rewarded measure for measure for burying his father Yaakov with fanfare. So Yosef buries Yaakov, Moshe Rabbeinu buries Yosef, and Hashem buries Moshe. Now, Le'al Moshe Bavad Amru, and it's not only of Moshe Rabbeinu that we say that God is involved in their interment. Ela kol tzadikim, but all the righteous. Shneimar, as the verse reads, V'halach lefanecha. Where's the pasuk? The pasuk is in Isaiah 58:8. V'halach lefanecha tzidkecha, k'vod Hashem yasvecha. And he will go before you, or you righteous ones, and what's the concluding words? K'vod Hashem yasvecha, and the glory of God will intern you. This is talking about the righteous. Okay. So now, even though it's obviously true that we're saying here that all the righteous are, I can't remember where I read this comment. Where did I read this comment? So even though we're saying it about all tzaddikim, that God is involved in their interment, but obviously something unique about Moshe Rabbeinu, because we're singling out Moshe Rabbeinu as getting rewarded for having dealt with the internment of Yosef, that Hashem is dealing with his internment. And therefore we must, I can't remember where I read this. Anyway, we must conclude that God's involved in all internments of the righteous, but for Moshe Rabbeinu, it was exclusively Hashem. Obviously, when the righteous are interned, we still do the actual proceeding. Human beings still do the actual proceedings. But Hashem obviously is connected there. But when it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu, it's exclusively on Moshe Rabbeinu. Nobody else does it, right? Because the verse says nobody knew where he was buried. So it's no human at all. So this is a greater level. Okay, so this is what we have here. So we have, let's try to think of how this might help. We have Yosef. Well, actually, we have Miriam first. And then we have Yosef. Then we have Moshe. Right? Miriam, did I miss anything? Miriam waited for an hour. Everybody waited for him for a week. Yosef buried his father, so he was buried with great fanfare. Moshe Rabbeinu buried Yosef, and he was buried by Hashem. And then we have all the righteous who are buried with some involvement from Hashem. So let's see if this somehow can counteract what we learned yesterday. So let's begin at the top. We had yesterday Shimshon with the eyes, and then Avshalom with hair, intimacy, heart. Yeah? So let's see. Miriam is the first one. So the second one's easy, actually, is interesting, because the second one, Avshalom, the first of Avshalom is hair, right? He showed off with his hair, and therefore he was struck by his hair. Now Yosef also was known for playing with his hair. As Rashi says, he played with his hair. He played with his hair and making himself look beautiful, which is why he was attracted to. That's why his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, was attracted to him, and he almost gave in to be intimate with her. And he's called Yosef HaTzadik. The reason why it's called Yosef the Righteous is because he did not engage with her, even though, however distant we think of a businessman today is when he travels somewhere. Yosef was like worlds away from his family. Nobody knew who he was. His family thought he was dead. This is like the easiest thing he can get away with, but he didn't. And what does Rashi tell us? What reminded him?
Had a dream or something?
What reminded him not to? The most yuknishal aviv. He had a vision of his father's face. And what's he being rewarded here for? For burying his father with fanfare. There's some kind of connection here. So Yosef almost failed like Shimshon, like Avshalom with the hair, but didn't fail like Shalom, but stopped. And what stopped him was his reminder and his respect of his father, which is what he's being rewarded for in the Mishnah here, for burying his father with great respect. So there's an easy connection there between number 2, Yosef, and number 1 of Avshalom, which is number 2 in the negative list, the hair, right? So there's the easy one right there, which explains how, even though it might be out of chronological order, because Miriam comes after Yosef. The simple reason why it's not in chronological order is because the other ones follow each other, right? Yosef buried Yaakov, Moshe buried Yosef, Hashem buried Moshe. That would be the simple reason why Miriam's not injected there, because it wouldn't flow. But still, this helps with that, putting that in order. Okay, so that's number 2 to number 2. Let's see how Miriam matches up with Shimshon, who is with the eyes, right? Shimshon saw that which he shouldn't have. And Miriam is the counter that she waited for her brother Moshe. So, first of all, what's Miriam doing with his brother Moshe? What's she doing when she's waiting there? She's watching. She's using her eyes for that which is appropriate, not which is negative. Maybe. But even moreover, maybe, I'm thinking out loud here. If you have any suggestions, you're welcome to chime in. I'm thinking also maybe, right, we know that Yaakov, after the decree, that Pharaoh said not to, that all firstborn should be thrown into the Nile. We know that Moshe's parents, Miriam and Moshe's parents, Yocheved and Amram, they separated. Because what's the point of having children if they're going to be thrown into the Nile? And Miriam said, your decree is worse than Parai. Miriam told her parents, Parai, his like Gazer El Aschadim, he only decreed against the death of boys. And you are making a decree against boys and girls. You're not being together, you're separating, you're not just ruining the possibility of having boys, which Parai is already taken care of, but you're ruining the possibility of girls also. So Miriam is, as opposed to, Shimshon desiring that which you shouldn't desire, Miriam is pushing for desire of that which you're supposed to desire. Right? Maybe. And she's doing so, obviously, with this great faith in Hashem, which we're going to learn, actually. We're going to learn an interesting thing in the Gemara, that Shimshon, he had his eyes on the Philistine women, even though it was Hashem that wanted him to be that way. As we're going to learn. Hashem wanted him to marry Philistine women. That way he can engage in, combating the enemy from the inside. Right? But nonetheless, the Gemara says he was still punished because he didn't do it for the reasons that Hashem wanted him. He did it because he liked it. And here, Yocheved and Miriam, Yocheved and Amram are getting together. Why? Because Hashem wants it. Hashem wants this. What Miriam's telling her parents. It's true. Pharaoh is decreeing against boys, but you're married. Hashem wants you to have children. You have to be together. So she's the counteraction, maybe, in that whereas Shimshon's making the mistake of lust for the sake of what his eyes desire, Miriam's pushing for engagement because it's what Hashem wants. Maybe. And then we have number 2, Yosef with Avshalom, that we already addressed a little bit. Yosef, with the image of his father, holds back from that which his hair caused in the negative. Right? Avshalom showing off with his hair. And then we have Moshe Rabbeinu, who buried Yosef, and in turn, God buried him. Right? And that's number 3, which in the negative list, number 3 was the second about Avshalom, which is the 10 women that he was with, the 10 concubines. Right? Another thing by the way, about Miriam is also, sorry?
Deceiving the heart of the people.
That's the next one. Deceiving the heart is the next one.
Oh, okay.
That's the last one. So deceiving the hearts of the people, I think, is all righteous. Because what defines the righteous is his heart is dedicated to one place, to Hashem himself. Right? There's an honesty in his heart that's dedicated to Hashem himself, not looking to deceive. Right? The one who's trusting in Hashem doesn't have to deceive anybody. It's only someone who doesn't trust in Hashem that needs to deceive. If you trust that Hashem is doing that to me, I think is the end, is the tzaddik going to the deceiving the hearts. Right? Especially since, yeah.
So the 10 concubines.
Yes, it is. So, but also before I get there, another thing about Miriam is Miriam is, when they wait for her for 7 days, it's because she was struck by tzaras as a result of Lashon Hara related to Moshe's wife. Right? Who also, like Shimshon, married a woman as a convert. He married, and that's what they're pointing fingers at. People were pointing and saying Moshe is married to somebody. Look, he's not married to a Jewish woman. He's not married to one of the children of Israel. She converted. Right? So, but unlike Shimshon, who did it, as I just mentioned, the Gemara tells us he did it for the lust of his eyes. Moshe Rabbeinu did it because it's what Hashem wanted. And what's the proof that Moshe Rabbeinu did it because Hashem wanted? For years and years and years, he was celibate. Because Hashem didn't want to be with her. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu for many years had to be celibate. So that's kind of, I guess, the counteraction to Avshalom, who's the opposite of celibacy, engaged with 10 concubines. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I'm in this marriage for you, Hashem. Just like Miriam telling his parents, you have to be in it for Hashem, not for your own personal lust. And the proof that Moshe Rabbeinu is in it for Hashem, not for himself, is that when Hashem told him no, he didn't engage. He was celibate for many years because he had to speak with Hashem all the time and so on. So maybe that's the counteraction there. And then the fourth one, the Avshalom stealing the hearts of his father, which is all about deception and romantic attachment, as we explained it maybe to that which is not supposed to is the opposite of what tzaddik is. Because tzaddik is all defined by not just his behavior for Hashem, which is like the Beinoni. The tzaddik is the one whose heart is in it for Hashem, not just thought, speech, and action. This is all again suggested, and really I'm going with this as I'm thinking about it and talking it out loud. But of course, the floor is open to disagreement or change or other ideas and whatnot. All right. See, yeah, you have with Yosef, you have self-control, right? He wanted to be with her, but then the image of his father says no. Strong, very, very strong self-control. But that's in the negative. Don't do something. Hold back from doing something. Miriam, on the other hand, is for Hashem's sake, positive engagement. Right? Tells his parents to be together because it's what Hashem wants. And then with Moshe Rabbeinu, you have it's interesting, this Lashon Hara thing, because gossip also is connected very much to the Sotah, and that it's these kinds of idle chatter and gossip and all that kind of thing which create the environment in which a Sotah might emerge. Someone who's not engaged in this kind of Lashon Hara doesn't end up in these scenarios. It's Lashon Hara that's very much at the crux of this misbehavior. And this Miriam, when they're waiting for her, it's a tshuva for her Lashon Hara. Right? So in some ways, it's also like a counteraction. Right?
But there's another component.
Yeah.
With this relating to the reward and punishments, and you said earlier, I guess yesterday, that the reward is much greater than the punishment. But I don't know, in these cases, is that?
Yeah, sure, because Miriam waits only for a small. In this case, actually, the reward is greater than the actual act, right? Because Miriam waited for a short while, and then they waited for 7 days. It's much greater. Yosef buried his father, and much greater than he himself is Moshe Rabbeinu burying him. And then Moshe Rabbeinu was buried by Hashem, which is obviously greater than himself. So it's increasingly in greater measure, right? Anyway, there's a lot of food for thought, and I hope we give it some more thought and think of. This is really an open-ended discussion. I'm not making anything solid ground, but I think this is something to work. A lot of things to work with here. When you think of these various different people and what they lived through, what they represent, what their challenges were, and how they dealt with them, right? And somehow there's also this idea of burial involved here also.
Joseph being in prison for so many years, that's not considered, that wasn't tied in.
Well, he went to prison because he held back, right? So he was framed. That's why he was sent to prison. Because he didn't give in to Potiphar's wife, she screamed, right? She grabbed his coat, she screamed, and she said, look, I have his coat, he came to rape me, and she framed him, and he was sent to jail for that.
That's a double-edged sword, because he could have gone to jail just the same even if he slept with her.
Right.
So
Right.
The lesson for us to learn is that he didn't sleep with her and he went to jail. That's the true lesson.
The lesson is do what's right, irrespective of whether the consequences seem better or not this way or that way. Right?
That's the lesson.
Right. Excuse me.
But the situation can go any way. Right.
Right.
We can then look at it like in different ways, but it's the same thing with the other examples. It's the examples for us to take from, not that it could have gone, in a different direction. It's because it went in that direction. It's what we're trying to zero in on. We're not looking at
what could have been.
What could have been, exactly. We're
looking at what is. And what was is that he didn't, and he went to jail anyway.
Right, exactly.
But that also led to positive, right? Because he went to jail, that's why he was able to interpret the dreams, which brought him to Pharaoh.
Right.
Right. So all these things. all part of that plan. Yeah.
Right.
But perhaps that.
But when he's going through, he doesn't know that.
No, exactly.
Right.
Right. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't know that when he was put into the basket, that he's going to free one day.
Miriam didn't know that when he put her into the basket and waited there, that this putting into the basket is going to lead to the freeing of the Jewish people. Yeah.
No, nobody knew that. Only Hashem knows that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Right, which I guess is like another element of trust here. You do what's right, even if right now you don't know how it comes out to the end. And if you do what's right, even if along the way negative things happen, you do it right, it's going to end up in a good place, right? As opposed to, let's say, like someone like Shimshon, who's supposed to be with this woman, but he's doing it for the wrong intention. He's doing it because of what his eyes want rather than because it's what Hashem wants, and therefore there's a punishment here. Like he's struck by the eyes, right? Maybe.
He's struck by the eyes.
Yeah.
For us as a lesson, for us to look back and say, okay, he was struck in his eyes
because his eyes were looking the wrong way.
Right, but he did not know that. We're learning from this.
Yeah.
Right.
But he should have known. In other words, not should have known. In other words, it's the expectation from Hashem is that your life is dedicated to serving Hashem, not what you desire. Even if what you desire happens to be what I want,
right? You
do it because Hashem wants. Right? We're going to learn that in the Gemara tomorrow, I guess. When we get there.
So that's the same thing like somebody saying, well, I don't put on tefillin because that's what Hashem wants. I do it because I like doing it.
Yeah.
Well, no. You're doing it because Hashem wants you to do it. You're doing it because you just want to do it. And you're really
the difference is that,
you're not fulfilling the commandment.
The big difference is that wanting to do a mitzvah is one thing versus wanting to be with a woman who happens to be the one Hashem wants you is very different, right? The desire in a mitzvah is different than the desire to be with a woman who happens to be the one that Hashem wants you to be with.
Well,
especially since it's a borderline questionable marriage, right?
Okay, so is it a commandment or a mitzvah, or when Hashem sends two souls into the world, two soulmates, and they meet, and they marry, and they have children.
So that's a good question. So
are those two bodies fulfilling a mitzvah that they don't even know they're fulfilling?
Yeah, they're definitely fulfilling a mitzvah if it's done with mikvah and a kosher wedding and all that. But I'll say also that I'm
not talking about the kosher I'm talking about those two souls.
Yeah, so it's a mitzvah if they are
coming together.
Only if it's done in kosher fashion. If it's not kosher fashion, it's not a mitzvah.
No, but let's take. No, what I'm saying is take apart. Put aside just for a moment the mikvah and the kosher way and the whole. Let's put this on the side for a moment.
The very fact they're coming together.
Talking about the very fact that those two souls found each other.
I understand that. So let's learn from Moshe Rabbeinu here.
Okay.
What's the indication that his marriage was a mitzvah? When he's not supposed to be together, he wasn't together. That's an indication that when he is together, it's a mitzvah. So the same thing is true of a husband and wife. What's the indication that their intimacy is a mitzvah? Because when Hashem says don't be together, they're not together. Because of mikvah or whatever. Right? So they go together. In other words, the very fact of them coming together, it's what Hashem wants because they're together. But the manner in which they do it will determine whether it's a mitzvah or not. Right? And in some ways, what's going to determine that it's a mitzvah? When they say no and they're supposed to say no. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, who said no, who wasn't with his wife, even when wasn't with his wife when Hashem told him not to. And that's the indication that when they are together, it's a mitzvah. Right? So they do together. I can't really separate the yes and the no go together. Right?
Right. So
right, like the keeping of Shabbos is defined by the things you don't do. Right. So the observance of a mitzvah being intimate together with one's wife is if it's predicated on sometimes no when Hashem says no.
Right. That's like
I think they go together. Right. You know, I thought you were going somewhere else, which is that when a boy and a girl meet, they have to think of self-interest. How else do you determine who you're going to marry when they're dating, right? But once you come to the point where you commit to marriage, now you have to transcend your selfish desire. Because if you're stuck in marriage for your selfish desire, it's going to be a disaster, right? That's just a disaster if two selfish people are living together. Right? So even though when they're dating, there's some self-interest, but once there's a commitment, and you have to be selfish when you're dating. By what other measure are you going to do it? You'll set yourself up with an abusive spouse if you're not selfish when you're dating.
But that selfishness is coming from our animal soul.
Yeah, The selfishness comes from the animal soul. That's right. With the end goal in mind of the godly soul doing the right thing. Yeah. So once a person gets to the point of commitment, then it has to transcend the self. They both have to transcend the self. If one transcends the self and the other one doesn't, again, you're in an abusive relationship. Where one is selfish and the other one is altruistic.
Maybe that's the Shimshon's method was maybe the more common method.
Which is selfish all the way to the end.
Selfish in the
Yeah.
beginning, and then refined itself through.
Or maybe it didn't. It didn't refine itself. Maybe it should have refined itself. Or maybe Shimshon's held to a higher standard. I'm not sure. We'll have to see in the Gemara.
So is there a correct balance between the animal soul and the godly soul?
Is the correct balance? Yeah.
The
animal soul doesn't go anywhere.
No, it doesn't go anywhere.
Right. So
they seem to complement each other. One cannot exist.
One cannot exist without the other. The godly soul can never do a mitzvah without an animal soul.
Right.
Right. And the animal soul would be just an animal if it didn't have a godly soul. Right. So the objective is that through the animal soul, the godly soul does what it has to. So through intimacy, let's just use this example. So we're talking about that. The godly soul does its mitzvah. So the animal soul eating, the godly soul does a mitzvah, eating on Shabbos.
Right.
It's the same animal soul's hunger that makes you eat on Shabbos that makes you eat on the week. But on Shabbos, it's a mitzvah. So it's the godly soul acting through the animal soul. Right. That they're enclosed. That's the word used in Chassidus. They're enclosed one on the other. The godly soul is enclosed in the animal, which is enclosed in the body.
Right.
Which you experience. It's just one experience, but it's layers and layers of your experience. The deepest one being the godly soul. So the harmony, it's not even so much a balance as much as a harmony. But the godly soul should be acting through the animal soul, which is essentially the refinement of the animal soul, the refinement of the body, the elevation of the body and the world that it lives in, which is the ultimate purpose, refining this world, refining ourselves.
Right.
Anyways, lots and lots to think about.
Always.
Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody. Yeah.